Hare Krishna. So today's last speech is day of Radhaஷ்டமி. Where is day of Śrīmati Radharani? Happy Radhaஷ்டமி. And I seek blessings from the senior Vaishnavas to please bless me so that I can speak and repeat the words of the Acharyas and the Gurus and the mentors and the senior Vaishnavas, and forgive me for any mistakes I've committed in this process. So today we will be starting Srimadbhagavatam 6th canto, and in this canto, Bhushan, protection by the Lord, is glorified. So in 2nd canto, we heard how Shukdev Goswami reveals to Parikshit Maharaj the 10 subject matters of Srimadbhagavatam. Atra sargascha sthana poshnamudhyah manmantri ishanukatha nirodha mukti ashraya. So atra sarga visarga. Sarga is the creation and visarga is the separation. And sthana, how this one is done. And the portion comes where the protection of the Lord is glorified, and this is what this canto focuses on. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udiriyet Shravtam Swakatha Krishna Punya Shavana Kirtanaha Hridayantasto He Bhadrani Vidunote Swasatam Nashtaprayasha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevayam Bhagavate Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhakti Nashtiki. Hare Krishna. So in the 6th canto, the prescribed duties of mankind, as we covered briefly, the portion of protection by the Lord is glorified. And there are 6 various aspects that have been covered in a very nice narration. The first is the story of the life of Ajāmila. And then this goes further, where Shukdev Goswami starts describing prayers by Prajapati Daksha, followed by his progeny, and then causing the curse to Viṣṇu, very curses Viṣṇu. And then the third subject is where Daksha's daughter's progeny is described, where the mention of Viṣṇu, the son of Rajana and Prajapati Toshta, appears. And that leads to the 4th aspect, where Indra offends his spiritual master, Brihaspati, and it goes on till Vratra's glorious death and the reactions coming from it to Indra. And the 5th subject matter is where Chitraketu's lamentation leading to him being cursed by Mother Parvati later on is described. And finally, Mother Diti goes to kill King Indra, and she performs a great austerity in that process. Hare Krishna. So Srimadbhagavatam 6th canto, chapter 1, verse 1. Shri Parikshit Vacha Nivritti Marga Katita Ada Bhagavata Yatha Karma Yoga Phaladhena Brahmā yada samshuti Shri Parikshit Uvacha Nivritti Marga Katita Ado Bhagavata Yatha Karma Yogo Balabdhena Brahmā Yad Samshati. Shri Parikshit Uvacha. Maharaj Parikshit said, Nivritti Marga, the path of liberation, Katita, described, Ado, in the beginning, Bhagavata, by your holiness, Yatha, duty, Karma, Krama, gradually, Yoga Ulabdhena, obtained by the yoga process. Brahmā, along with Lord Brahmā, after reaching Brahmalok, Yat, by which way, Aśvamedha-yajñas, cessation of the repetition of birth and death. Translation by His Divine Grace Śrīla Śrīdhara Svāmī, Śrīla Prabhu. Maharaj Parikshit said, O my Lord, O Shukdev Goswami, you have already described in the second canto the path of liberation, Nivritti Marg. By following that path, one is certainly elevated gradually to the highest planetary system, Brahmalok, from which one is promoted to the spiritual world along with Lord Brahmā. Thus, once the repetition of birth and death in the material world ceases. Purport. Since Maharaj Parikshit was a Vaishnava, when he heard the description at the end of the fifth canto of the different hellish conditions of life, he was very much concerned with how to liberate the conditioned souls from the clutches of Maya and take them back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, he reminded his spiritual master, Shukdev Goswami, about the Nivritti Marg, or path of liberation, which he had described in the second canto. Maharaj Parikshit, who at the time of death was fortunate to have met Shukdev Goswami, inquired from Shukdev Goswami about the path of liberation at that crucial time. Shukdev Goswami very much appreciated his question and congratulated him by saying, Variyanesha te prashnaha krito loka hitam nrapa atmaved sammataha pumsam shota vyadishu yat paraha. My dear king, your question is glorious because it is very beneficial for all kinds of people. The answer to this question is the prime subject matter for hearing, and it is approved by all transcendentalists. Parikshit Maharaj was astonished that the living entities in the conditioned stage do not accept the path of liberation, devotional service, instead of suffering in so many hellish conditions. This is the symptom of a Vaishnava. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha. A Vaishnava is an ocean of mercy. Paradukha dukhi is unhappy because of the unhappiness of others. Therefore, Parikshit Maharaj, being compassionate toward the conditioned souls suffering in the hellish life, suggested that Shukdev Goswami continue describing the path of liberation, which he had explained in the beginning of Srimadbhagavatam. The word aśvamedha is very important in this connection. Samsriti refers to continuing on the path of birth and death. Aśvamedha, on the contrary, refers to Nivritti Marg, or the path of liberation, by which one's birth and death ceases and one gradually progresses to Brahmalok, unless one is a pure devotee who does not care about going to the higher planetary systems, in which case one immediately returns home back to Godhead. By executing devotional service, Tattva deham punarjanma neti, Parikshit Maharaj therefore was very eager to hear from Shukdev Goswami about the path of liberation for the conditioned soul. According to the opinion of the Acharyas, the word Karma Yoga Parabdhena indicates that by first performing Karma Yoga and then Jnana Yoga and finally coming to the platform of Bhakti Yoga, one can be liberated. Bhakti Yoga, however, is so powerful that it does not depend on Karma or Jnana Yoga. karma yoga or jnana yoga. Bhakti yoga itself is so powerful that even an impious man with no assets in karma yoga or an illiterate with no assets in jnana yoga can undoubtedly be elevated to the spiritual world if he simply adheres to bhakti yoga. Mount Aveshyasi Asamseha. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 8.7 that by the process of bhakti yoga, one undoubtedly comes back to Godhead, back home to the spiritual world. Yogis, however, instead of going directly to the spiritual world, sometimes want to see other planetary systems, and therefore they ascend to the planetary system where Lord Brahmā lives, as indicated here by the word Brahmā. At the time of dissolution, Lord Brahmā, along with all the inhabitants of Brahmalok, goes directly to the spiritual world. This is confirmed in the Vedas as follows. Brahmana sate sarve samprapte prati sancharai prasunyate kritagmanaha pravishanti parampadam. Because of their exalted position, those who are on Brahmalok at the time of dissolution go directly back home, back to Godhead, along with Lord Brahmā. Hare Krishna. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yat Kripatadaham Vande Shri Gurum Dīnataram. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. So here in this chapter, Parikshit Maharaj, it is said, as Srila Prabhupada elaborately explained in the purport, that he has no concern for himself. He is facing death. Let's also understand that this is in the middle of the 7 days. The 6th canto is being recited by Śrīla Goswami, and Parikshit Maharaj is more worried about the other conditioned souls who were described that because of their past sinful actions they have to go through, they have to suffer in the hellish planets, and different type of hellish, punishments were described by Śrīla Goswami. So he is now paradukkhadukhi. He is feeling pain that, he's feeling sad that conditioned souls are suffering. And at the same time, he is glorifying Śrīla Goswami that he is so fortunate that in the last few days of his life, in the last week of his life, he is able to get the association of Śrīla Goswami, from whom he is getting, the wonderful knowledge, the pastime of Lord Shri Krishna and the devotees. So in this particular chapter, when he is asking this question of Śrīla Goswami, there are 5 different lessons I'm able to pick up from the different incidents. So first is, of course, the portion on how does the Lord give his protection? And Śrīla Goswami does not give him directly. Like sometimes the spiritual master wants to test his disciple. So Śrīla Goswami goes on that particular aspect that, when someone is caused harm, suffering in the hellish condition, if someone has, acted in a sinful manner, then he has to suffer because of those. And as per the karma yoga, first he is giving the example of karma yoga, that one has to do atonement. And he refers to Manu Samhita and the Vedas. So Śrīla Goswami giving the reference to Manu Samhita and the Vedas is identifying to Parikshit Maharaj that by doing atonement, one can be relieved. And at that time, Parikshit Maharaj hears it. And then he asks another question, saying that yes, atonement, but the atonement itself is not, a solution. Because it seems like one is forced to continue to do sinful acts. And how can that be stopped? Because just by doing atonement, that tendency to perform sinful act does not go away. And he refers to it as a bathing of an elephant. Just like an elephant goes in the water, nicely bathes himself, and as soon as he comes out, he puts dirt on his body. So the process of karma yoga seems like where the different actions which are sinful you have performed, then you atone for those actions, and then you again continue to perform sinful activities following afterwards. So he's saying this is not a very good process, karma yoga. So he has passed that test given by Śrīla Goswami. when Śrīla Goswami is identifying that Karma Yoga is one process. And then Śrīla Goswami elaborates Jnana Yoga is one process. So again, just focusing on the Karma Yoga perspective, reminding Srila Prabhupada, he used to give this example, and in our current world myths, we also see many such examples. He used to give this example where he used to say that, Christ was all good, Jesus was all good, and then the Christians, I don't like Christians because, they go and they continue, thou shalt not kill. That was his one point. That Jesus clearly stated that one should not, kill. And then sometimes he was hearing the response that, no, it means murder, not killing. And he was very strong. He said, that means that at that time, all the people who were around, Jesus were all murderers. That's even worse. But thou shalt not kill was something he was identifying. And then there is a process of atonement. The Purport, Srila Prabhupada describes that even in Christianity there is the process of atonement, that people go to the churches every Sunday and then they, confess the sins that they have performed, and then they have prescribed some atonement activities, chant the name of the Lord and different activities which are pious. And by doing those activities, they seem to have atoned. But after Sunday comes Monday, and the activities continue. Shri Garbhodakaśāyī ki jai. Shri Radha Madan Mohan ki jai. Shri Sitaram Vaishnava Hanuman ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Kori Vaishnava ki jai. So in this case, Karma Yoga does not seem to give a proper solution that traditional knowledge is satisfied. And remembering some of the description as during Srila Prabhupada time, there was a devotee. He said that Srila Prabhupada, after he was initiated and so forth, he said, Srila Prabhupada, I had committed some things in the past, and because of that now I'm going to jail, I have been put in prison. Srila Prabhupada said, that's no problem. That was your past karma, so you are purifying yourself. And in the purport also, Srila Prabhupada identifies that, the capital punishment, he talks about capital punishment, he speaks about it, and he describes that it's in his purport very strongly, that when one has committed murder, then as per the Manu Samhita and the scriptures, the punishment is that he should be immediately killed to get, rectified from that sinful act. However, people who do not understand this are, speculating and, removing the aspect of capital punishment. Capital punishment is to purify one of the sinful act that they have performed by committing a murder. And people in their speculative mindset are trying to define different laws which are actually causing havoc. So continuing further, it once happened that Srila Prabhupada, he was, he had a disciple and he was at his desk. He used to normally sometimes sit on the floor, on a small cushion, and he had a lower desk where he would do his writings and so forth and give dictations. And it once happened that there was a small bird crawling on the floor. So the devotee immediately got up, one of his disciples, and he immediately picked up with a paper, very carefully the bird, and took it outside the insect and released it. And Srila Prabhupada smiled. And he said, in the past, you would have just matched it. But now you are getting purified by the process of bhakti, by the process of devotional service. So you are very conscious of other living entities, and you are giving them the proper respect and taking care of them properly. And which also reminds us of the scenario where when Radhanath Maharaj, he was at the airport, and he was asked by another gentleman who approached and said that the environment minister wants to speak to you. Menka wanted to speak to you. And this, of course, an acharyas in our sampradaya, Srila Prabhupada says, a sannyasi would not say no when, a lady is, wants to talk or speak to. So Maneka Gandhi came and she immediately started saying, what are you guys doing? We are cleaning all these things, and what is your contribution? And Radha Maharaj's response was amazing. He said that actually you are taking care of the outer dirt. You are cleaning it outside. You are cleaning it inside, so that the dirt doesn't come out outside. So we are purifying the living entities internally, making them pure, so that, so we are cleaning them internally, we are cleaning them externally, we are partners in this, it's a win-win scenario. And she really appreciated that response by the Maharaj. So here, we're talking of karma yoga. And in real world, can you think of some instances where this thing continues to go on? At my work, it was very interesting that a gentleman has gone through and signed up for a program for detoxification. And detoxification is a program where he's going through different electrolysis and different methods. For 3 months he was going through. And I asked him, so when you're going through this process, how's it helping you? He's like, all the toxic is going away from my body. And I said, so you still drink? Like, when you go out, happy hour and all that? He's like, yes. So I'm saying, so my response was, so you're doing intoxication and then followed by detoxification. Where's the intelligence in that? You're continuing to repeat the process of intoxication and detoxification. And you can think of very similar examples. Can you think of some of those examples where, similar things go on, where a person purifies as well as they, cause the same havoc to themselves and to others? Oh, yeah, we covered the elephants. Parikshit Maharaj identifies the bathing of an elephant. But there are so many examples. Sometimes, we are trying to clean, and there is a tendency to push all the dirt under the rug, right? So it hasn't really gone away. You have just covered it up. There is a saying I was reading that, a sinless is a man who doesn't have a past. A sinless is a man who doesn't have a past. Is a man, so again, if someone has become good now, they must have committed. So again, it's not that the case, that there will never be a case that in the past they never committed sin. So it was very interesting when you realize that in our past we all have committed sinful activities, but then through the process we got purified. So maybe we are in a purified state now, but if somebody was to look at our past, we will find ourselves again. Let's do an introspection. We can see so many things we might have done in our past which may be considered sinful. Hare Krishna. So here, Śrīla Goswami, after hearing Parikshit Maharaj's referring that karma yoga is not the effective process, he's very happy actually. He's saying, so he has understood, he is realizing that karma yoga is not the right process. And then he gets to the next level of jnāni yoga. Jnāni yoga is where one learns about, the knowledge from the Vedas and from the scriptures. And where do Vedas come from? As given in the Purport, Vedas are themselves the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they come from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so as he's describing that by learning, by knowledge, one can purify themselves. And he goes on when he's describing that, and he gives a reference of that all the acharyas and the transcendentalists, they give reference to an old account and the history of the life of Ajāmila. And then he goes on to describe the life of Ajāmila. He identifies, he starts with that Ajāmila was a very sinful man. But although he was a Brahmana, he had married a prostitute who was a maidservant. And because of her association, he had fallen down from his position and was causing all kind of, doing all kind of sinful activities. And so he goes on describing that Ajāmila was so sinful that sometimes he would cheat others, sometimes he would literally plunder them, sometimes he would, cheat in gambling and take away their wealth and so forth. And somehow or other he was carrying out his livelihood. And from this prostitute he had 10 sons. And the youngest one was named Narayan. And so this is where the third aspect is, where the story of Ajāmila is being explained. And someone will say that he was so sinful. Did he keep all the other sons' names Narayan as well? Now there is an interesting reference in the Puranas where actually he was not the one who named his sons, gave them spiritual names. He gave them mundane names. So even the 10th one had a mundane name. But how did he get the name Narayana? There's a very nice story. So Lomisha Rishi, this is Lomisha Rishi, is a great sage. And in 100 years, just one hair from his body falls. And on his body is covered with long hairs. And in 100 years, one hair falls. And thus, his 100 years are the same 100 years as Lord Brahma's. So you can imagine. That's just a reference. And Lomisha Rishi once had a very strong itch in his body. He was trying to understand how to get away with this itch. It was too strong, so one of his friends, he referred that maybe you want to eat food from the remnants of a sinful man, and that would remove your itch. So now Lomisha Rishi was wondering, who's this most sinful man whose remnants I have to eat to remove this itch? So the friend identified that Ajāmila is the most sinful at this time. So if you go to Ajāmila's house and eat his remnants of his food, then this itch will go away. So Lomisha Rishi went to Ajāmila's house, and his wife, the prostitute, who was earlier the maidservant also, she was sitting feeding the 10th baby. And at that time, he asked that could I get something. So she says, who are you? So he said, I'm a sage and I just need something to eat. And she brought, people were respectful, it's described, they understood that a great sage has come to their home, this is a great opportunity, let's offer him something. So she brought some nice grain and so forth. He said, no, I want remnants of the food left by your husband. And she immediately thought, oh my God, Ajāmila is so sinful. This remnants, why would somebody need? And he insisted, no, I need the food left by your husband, the remnants of his food. And so she went and found, some of the remnants left by Ajāmila. And Lomisha Rishi just takes one bite and the itch goes away. As he's walking away from the house, he thanks her, and he's walking away, and then when the itch goes away, he says, she gave me something that relieved me, so I should return the favor. So he came back, and he asked her, what's the name of the child? And she gave some mundane name. And he said, no, don't name him that, call him Narayana. So people were very, even sinful people at that time were very pious, so she took it as a blessing from Lomisha Rishi and named her son Narayana. Since he was the youngest one, he was the dearest to her as well as to Ajāmila. So Ajāmila was so much attached to this son, when he would sit to eat, he would say, Narayana, please come here, sit and eat with me. When he would drink something, he would immediately call Narayana, and say, Narayana, please come here, drink with me, play with me, stay with me. He was very much attached to his son. And his sinful life, he had spent 88 years like that. So he was really old at that time, and his time of death was approaching. So at the moment of death, he sees three very ferocious beings holding ropes in their hand, and their faces were twisted and very scary. They approached him, and he was on his bed, and they used the rope to pull the soul out of his body. So he is experiencing that he is being pulled out of his body. And at that time, his son Narayana was close by, and because Narayana was so close to him, and he was so attached to Narayana, he immediately cried out, Narayana, Narayana, Narayana. So when he cries out, Narayana, 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 4 effulgent personalities, 4 armor forms, they appear at the scene. So of course you can understand that 3 personalities who were trying to, with the rope, pulling out Ajāmila out of his body, were the Yamdutas, were the messengers of Yam, the Lord of Death. And these 4 personalities, they were the Viṣṇu Dutas who came after hearing the Ajāmila chant the word Narayana. And since he had called out the word of Narayana, he also immediately remembered Lord Narayana. Śrīla Prabhupada, elaborates in his Purport that at that time. So here, as these Viṣṇu Dutas appeared, they immediately forbade Yamdutas from, taking away Ajāmila, the soul. And they asked Yamdutas that, what is the process of punishing others? And who are the actual candidates for punishments? Are all karmis engaged in fruitive activities punishable or only some of them? So they ask these three important questions. And Yamdutas, being messenger of the Yama, the Lord of Death, who is also a great Vaishnava, so he is one of the, Mahajanas. So having heard from, so this is Shabda Brahmā being identified, heard from Yamdev, the Lord of Death, they answer this, and they gave a very philosophical answer, that living entities in this material world are under the influence of the three modes of material nature: Sattva-guna, mode of goodness; Raja-guna, mode of passion; and Tamo-guna, mode of ignorance. And so they continue, based on the influence of the mode, they continue to carry out their activities. And just by looking at the different activities, there are different witnesses, and they identify the witnesses. They identify that the sun, fire, sky, air, demigods, moon, evening, day, night, directions, water, land, and the super soul himself are all witness of the activities of the living entity. And so based on the reference from these witnesses, that the different activities the living entity is performed, he gets the reaction accordingly. So if he has performed sinful activities, he is punished by those sinful activities. And on top of that, they continue to elaborate, identifying as how a living entity is constantly performing, these sinful activities. If they perform sinful activity, it causes them to further go down and down and down. And they give the reference of seasons. They say that just like looking at the present spring season, we can have a prediction as what the past spring season previous years have been, and what the future spring season the future would be. And so as they are describing, they are identifying that this atonement, they are identifying the karmī aspect. And then they give the history of Ajāmila. So it is the young Dutas who identify that this Ajāmila is definitely punishable because he is very sinful. In the past, when he was a young boy, he was a very good Brahmana. He followed and respected his spiritual masters, he respected his elders, he respected fire, he respected all the living entities, and he was carrying out his spiritual progress very nicely, as a Brahmanas does. He was very good at chanting the Vedic mantras. And once his father had asked him to collect the wood, the firewood, and the two types of kusha grass, samvit and kusha, the two types of grasses. And so when he had gone to collect the wood and the grass, as he was returning, he saw a Shudra whose body was covered with turmeric powder, was embracing a prostitute. And at that time, Ajāmila tried, as a boy, young man, he tried to control his senses and refrain from seeing this prostitute and the Shudra who was embracing this prostitute, and her clothes had become loose. So it's described that he was trying to control himself. So this is the reference where Jnān Yoga is being identified, that he was trying to control his senses based on the Jnān he had achieved, right? He had learned over his upbringing. However, he was not able to control, and he got attracted. He got attracted to that prostitute so much so that he even ignored it. He brought that prostitute in his house as a maidservant. And he had a beautiful wife coming from a very nice family. Yes. And he even ignored her, he ignored his parents, and actually threw out. So in the second chance, the book written by Śrīla Prabhupada, he has given a very elaborate description as how Ajāmila, throws out. So Yamdutas are identifying that, Ajāmila did all this. So he's very sinful, and by giving him punishment, we are actually going to purify him. This is where the chapter ends. And the Yamdutas also identify various different factors where they are describing how living entities go through different sinful activities and so forth. They are saying, based on their past karmas, they take the next birth. And, if they are born as demigods, they are always jubilant, they have constant happiness. As humans, they are constantly lamenting. So, the living entity is constantly lamenting as a human being. And as an animal, they are constantly under the fear. They are constantly, based on their instincts, they are always fearful. And nevertheless, even though they may be jubilant, they may be lamenting, or they are fearing, they are miserable. So the interesting thing is, even demigods, they are miserable. And we have seen so many instances where Lord Indra is so fearful, like someone else is going to take his position. There's always that fear he has. We covered earlier how Bali Maharaj, was always his concern. Like Indra was so concerned that Bali Maharaj, he's so powerful and he takes away all the time and so forth. And he had to again and again go back to Lord Brahmā, Lord Shiva, and then finally to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Viṣṇu and Lord Krishna for protection. So this is where this particular chapter ends, where they are describing as how the living entity is constantly suffering in this material world. And in this chapter, in conclusion, we hear that even though karma yoga is a process by which someone can progress, by atonement, it does not take away that tendency to commit sin. And even though with jnana yoga, one can continue to go to a higher planet and higher planet, there is a tendency to fall down. And as per the Vedas, there is a description where Śrīla Prabhupada goes in his purport that from Brahma Loka, at the end of the life of Brahma, Brahma returns home. Now further in that, Puranas also give us this reference, the Vedas give us this reference as well, that not all Brahmans, means 99.999%, is most of them, they return back home, back to Godhead. But some of them fall down and they take birth in the living entities, and that's how the first position that the living entity gets from the spiritual world when they come to the material world is that of the Lord Brahma. So they become one of the lords, Brahma, of one of the universe. And because they are not able to go back, they get trapped in the cycle of birth and death. So here the futility of karma yoga and jnana yoga, in it being able to liberate ourselves from this material world, from the cycle of birth and death, is being described. And the glories of chanting the holy name of the Lord is revealed in the very next chapter. So it's very important for us to always remember Lord, never forget Lord, and chant the holy name of the Lord. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments? Yes? Can you give a mic? You want to hear, Prabhu? It's definitely on the live.
No, he's asking, is it online? Is it on the internet?
It's on the internet through live, Facebook Live.
Through live, okay. Yes. Thank you for the very thoughtful class. A couple of comments. One, quoted Manu Samhita. We need to be a little careful how much we quote Manu Samhita, because some may apply, a lot may not apply in the current
Yes.
And particularly I'm thinking in terms of, as Vaishnavas, we have to apply the principles of the Shastras according to time and place. And like you mentioned, capital punishment.
Yes.
In the modern age, capital punishment is very much in question. We would say philosophically it's an atonement for the sin, but there's so many mistakes in the current judicial systems we have to be careful. You didn't say this, but I just want to make a point. We shouldn't just say, well, our scripture says capital punishment is appropriate, because we read every day cases where the juries aren't fair, or they come back and they do DNA tests and people are proven innocent 20 years later.
Yes.
So this just, as citizens, we have to be careful we don't buy into that.
Yes.
And I was just thinking too, it's interesting, I'm curious, in that Purana, I don't think I've ever read what's the fate of Ajāmila's second wife, who had formerly been a prostitute, because I was thinking with Haridas Thakur, because of his purity, she became a great devotee.
Yes.
Because of Ajāmila, he continued down the path of sinful activity. So also we have to be careful that, sometimes there's a tendency, like, the prostitute, but he's the one that was attracted to the prostitute.
Yes.
You think of this day and age, they say there's something like 400,000 people in human, what's the term they use these days? Trafficking in the United States. A large percentage of those are sexually trafficked. And, they get innocent people get trapped in this whole horrendously abusive system.
Yes.
If the men were not out of control, it's mostly men
Yes.
that pay these people. If the men were in control of their senses, that the children and the women wouldn't be sexually abused, and so sometimes there's this tendency to blame. They're the victims. So I just want to put that again in the bigger context. It's important. I mean, overall, the class is great, but I'm just thinking in terms of sometimes how we interpret and apply these things in the modern context. And the question of Lord Brahmā, I didn't hear your reference. You said that Jiva comes. I think there's some different opinions on that from different acharyas. Where was that reference that when we first become Lord Brahmā?
Actually, it's I can provide you the reference. I do not have it on me right now.
Okay.
But it's from the Vedas. I stepped from the Vedas. So
Yeah, because I think there's different opinions on that. So, yeah. But
which is
anyways, those three things were just comments, but overall, again, the class was very inspiring. I appreciate the fact you researched it so well and discussed things in such depth.
And just to kind of it is a general way that a living entity comes as Brahma, because we know of the cases where Vijay from the spiritual world came as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyakashipu. Right? So we have references in the Shastra that we are referring to that they didn't come as Lord Brahma, they came as deity sons, as deities, the demons. So yes. So it's a general statement, just like there is a general reference that Śrīla Prabhupada is giving, that after the passing of Lord Brahma, he returns back home. So that's like, most of them return back home. So right, yeah.
Our Brahmā happens to be the
Yes.
Marcus.
Yes. Yes. Right. Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we're going to say these things like that, that are a bit